Minimalists.
All right, and we're back with Jason Zook.
Yeah.
We were just, during the break, we were talking about Andrew Schultz, and we're going to get to Own Your Weird. We're going to talk a lot about Jason here, but since we're talking about bucking the status quo, Andrew Schultz has been on the podcast before. He's a comedian who, he just dropped a new special, and it's hilarious. It's just called the Crowd Work Special.
I can't wait to check it out.
I mean, comics spend 2 years creating the material for a special, and they craft it. He went out on stage in Washington, D.C. for 40 minutes and just did. Now, Ryan and I typically hate crowd work because it's like...
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Well, because it's making fun of the person. Like, you're not laughing with the person. It's like,
it almost doesn't take a lot of effort.
Yeah,
like, it's easy
It's
comedy
lowbrow.
almost.
It is lowbrow. Yeah, it is. Yeah, crowd work, like, for all intents and purposes, I look at it like it's lowbrow. I never enjoy it except for when Andrew Schultz does it.
I totally agree. And there's this part in the new special. It's just called the Crowd Work Special. We'll put a link to it. It's out on YouTube right now. And if you're easily offended, well, then I don't know why you're listening to this, but you're especially you're especially going to be offended by his special, because that's the thing. He dissects everything from race to politics to culture, and he does so extemporaneously. I mean, he's freestyling jokes on stage with the interaction of a crowd. And he basically said, he said, my job as Andrew Schultz is, when everyone in society is saying, well, things are this way, my job is to say, well, when you think about it, and like just go into it every time. And he absolutely does it. And it is, I mean, it's one of the best specials I've seen in a long time. And the fact that it's done off the top of the head, you see these other comedians who release specials that aren't half as good as this. And he is sort of the comedian of the moment. We're in a moment where we've become overly sensitized in a way, right? And that's why I can say thank you to the Patreon supporters who let us like do things that are a lot more they allow us to fail in public in a way that we may not be able to otherwise. They allow us to question things and think out loud, sort of how a stand-up comedian would get on stage and talk about stuff that we wouldn't talk about in public.
I love what you talked about when I was like, oh, is it on Netflix? You're like, no, he released it on YouTube. And I just think that's such a powerful example of, you don't need the permission of all the gatekeepers anymore.
Yeah.
I haven't needed it with any of my crazy ideas. I've definitely thought I might have needed it, but it's proven that I haven't. And I think that just goes to show that anyone can do anything. It's just a matter of believing in yourself, or if you don't believe in yourself, having the courage to go, I want the goal more than I fear the reality it takes to get there. And I steal that from my wife, who said that, and I've stolen it now and said it and put it in my book, and she still gets credit for it. But it is so true. When you really want that thing, you'll do whatever it takes. But when you find that people don't actually want the thing, they just want the potential of success or the notoriety, it doesn't happen. And so this is, I just love that example, because Netflix tells him no, Hulu tells him, all these people tell him no, and he goes, all right, I'll put it on YouTube. I still want to do it. And then the ripple effect of that is also kind of the planting of the seed of, this will lead to other things. Even if this doesn't become super successful, someone will see this, and maybe that will open the door to something else. If you want that, you may not even want that.
Well, he also realized in a way that he was doing something different, because his last special, when we had him on the podcast, he released it, instead of having an hour-long special, he released it in 5-10 minute chunks, because that's how things get shared. They're more bite-sized. And then he also he doesn't treat anything as precious. He puts new jokes like stand-up jokes on his Instagram every week. So you have a 1 or 2 minute joke that's out there, as opposed to like, well, I'm going to treat this as something that's so precious and no one else can see it. He's willing to throw it away and start from scratch essentially every week. Now that takes a particular kind of courage as well. We often hold on to this idea, well, it's like, well, I can't share this yet. It's not fully baked. It's not perfect. Well, no, he's putting his best foot forward, and that actually requires some failure along the way as well. But as he has failed his way to success, because he's sharing things that all of a sudden go viral, because other people are like, yeah, I identify with that, and now I'm going to share it in a way that you can't share, the new Dave Chappelle special. You can't pull out, it's actually illegal for you to take a bit from that and share it on Twitter or whatever, right? Whereas Andrew's like, no, here it is. share it if you want, if you find value in it, and it creates this new paradigm that we've never had before. And I think it takes a certain amount of bravery, because now he is facing choices where it's like, now they're coming to him because everything he puts out there gets multi-million views, and it's like, okay, now we see the value in this, and we want to latch ourselves onto it, even though we used to say no to it.
I'll tell you what, though, like, that's a much better position to be in, because if, let's say, he went to Netflix with his first special and they were like, yes, we want, like, there would be so much pressure for it to be this great thing. Netflix is going to have more control over it, where now he kind of gets to do it the way he wants to do it. And, you know, if Netflix says we want to have you on this special on Netflix, and they want to do it a certain way, he can be like, you know what, this just isn't a good match. I'm going to just go ahead and keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I think you afford the ability to take control of your art and your work when you've done it the hard way.
Yeah.
When you do it the way that someone else gives you the platform, you kind of lose control. You lose the flexibility, because then they go, well, hey, we're the ones who did this for you. And they kind of are. They kind of, and that's why I think for you guys, like, I've been super close to your story and your journey. And I just love the fact that, like Netflix didn't put you on the map. You had already done that for so many years beforehand. But so many people think, oh wow, it's so cool you guys got your start on Netflix. And it's the same for me. Like, people see the work that I like, oh, you did this, and it's like, yeah, but it's just like 12 years of also doing other things. and I think one of the things I wanted to bring up, just because I love this example, when I was through the editing phase of this book, Neil Brennan's stand-up came out on Netflix, and it's the three mics.
Yeah,
it blew my mind.
Brilliant.
I've never seen anything like it, and that, to me, I just kind of had gotten bored of stand-up for a while, because it's like the same thing. It's like, guy goes on stage, woman goes out on stage, they tell jokes, they do whatever, and some are better than others, but this is like a whole different concept. Mm-hmm. Right. And I just thought, like, I'm like, if I was writing a book that shared other people's weird stories, this would be one of the first, because I just loved it, and I watched it, and it completely changed the way I felt about stand-up again, and like got me excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah, going out and being weird, like, some, you know, it could be a very good thing. I think what we were talking about earlier about being authentic, about being consistent, about putting your best foot forward. Like, if you're weird, but you're being authentic, you are putting your best foot forward, like, you are going to have a level of success. Are you going to be Neil Brennan, multimillionaire? Yeah, you know, no one can guarantee that, but you absolutely will have some level of success.
Yeah, I'm thinking of weird now. Since we're talking about stand-up comics, one of my favorite comics, I've only seen him live once. Rick Glassman, he is, I never even heard of him before. He's been on a bunch of TV shows and stuff, but I saw him come up at, I think it was the Belly Room over at the Comedy Store, and he was so weird, but in all the best ways. I mean, and there's a particular kind of humor that wouldn't exist. I mean, he was almost, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, that's like, there's not language to describe what he's doing. The same thing, like with the Neil Brennan thing, we could say, you know, three mics or whatever. In fact, there was something about reinventing the wheel. So Easy Greek had a question. We'll skip ahead real quick. Easy Greek said, is bucking the status quo always the preferable way forward? Are we sometimes too keen on reinventing the wheel or trying to fix something when it's not broken, just as an attempt to make our mark on the world? What's the value in being found in staying within the status quo, if any? Now, here's what I would say. First off, there's nothing. We often use this term reinventing the wheel as a pejorative, like what? But actually, that's kind of what you want to do most of the time. It's great that we've reinvented the wheel, because we started out with like the cartwheel for a horse and buggy, and if you try to put that on your Toyota Corolla, you're going to fail. So like, we've reinvented the wheel several times, and it's been to our benefit. And we have to reinvent the wheel when we're actually trying to make better wheels. And in many ways, that's sort of what Neil did with Three Mics. Is it wasn't completely revolutionary. It was reinventing the wheel. It was creating a better wheel for him, for the vehicle he was trying to deliver.
Yeah, and I think so much of like what you were just saying about success is similar to this, where it becomes the internal motivator. So success is obviously super subjective, right? It means a different thing to other people. But for me, I know with all of my weird ideas, if they're not weird, because I've experienced it, I don't feel good about them. I don't feel like they're good things. Even if they've been successful financially, I don't get an internal validation from it. And money is great. You got to pay the bills. You have to figure that out. And it goes back to Jessica earlier with the woodworking, right? Like, sure, it may not be the ultimate woodworking stuff that you want to do now, but maybe you have to do that to bridge the gap to figure out what it is that you're doing. And now I know for me, I have bridged that gap. So now every project that I do, I feel like I do need to reinvent the wheel a little bit. Otherwise, I don't enjoy the work. And so you have to figure that out for yourself. So if you're not at that place where you have to do something differently, then by all means, do it the same way, because competition just means people are willing to pay for it in business. Yeah. That's all it is. That's the truth. When you see all these different things, it means that people are paying for it. So that's a good thing to buy into that. But then if you really don't feel like you're getting value out of it, you have to find your own internal metric to say, I need to do it this way. Otherwise, I'm not going to feel good about it.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about the minimalists, I mean, dude, this is not a new idea. And when we started talking about minimalism, it certainly wasn't a new idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it dates back to the Stoics or Jesus or Buddha or whoever you want to bring in there. But what we did is we had our unique perspective. We had certain ideas, certain revelations, certain experiments that we didn't see get put out there. And we were like, hey, let's put this stuff out there because, this is inventing the wheel in a new way, I guess. I mean, kind of what you were talking about earlier.
It's just create a different wheel. So, and here's the thing: people find value in. Some people will find value in what you're doing. The competition thing you talked about. Seth Godin wrote about this not that long ago, where he was talking about the best place to sell a book is in a bookstore, right? Which is actually the highest competitive place. So if I were to put this at the local Chevron on the corner near my house, like, you wouldn't have any competition,
right?
But you're probably going to sell fewer copies than you would at a Barnes & Noble or on Amazon or whatever, because people go to the bookstore to buy books. They don't go to Chevron to buy books. And so there's obviously other dynamics that are involved as well. I mean, with the internet, people hear about it on something like this and they'll go straight to Amazon and hopefully buy the book. But ultimately, you're much better off amongst the competition. It doesn't mean you're going to sell to every person that comes in the door, but they're no longer asking the question, should I buy a book? They're asking the question, which book do I want to buy?
I feel like, Jason, he's challenging you to get all your books in Chevrons.
Chevron, if you're listening, I'm not interested because I drive a Tesla, so it's fine.
Now, Jason, I wanted to read something. We do this segment called More About Less, where we try to read something that is in line with the topic or our values. And you have on your website your core values. Now, this is for you and your wife, I'm assuming, since it's on your About page and the two of you are together.
It's true.
And so you have some core values here, and Ryan and I are often talking about values, and we make distinctions between foundational values, core values, minor values, and something else called imaginary values. So these are the sort of 4 types of values, and it might sound like semantics, but for me, like, core values are sort of one step above the foundational values. I think all of us have similar foundational values: health, relationships, creativity, personal growth or improvement, you could call it, and service or contribution. And so that's sort of the foundation of the house, and then the sort of studs of the house is built on would be your core values. And so you have a few things here like transparency, authenticity, humor, positivity, originality, intention, curiosity, and action. And you also have sparkling water and donuts, which
you gotta have the imaginary values too, you know. The ephemeral values.
Actually, I would call these minor minor values, and I think quite often where we get into trouble is we treat our minor values or our imaginary values, things we pretend are valuable that aren't. We treat them as though they are the most important things in our life. Totally. And our value system gets flipped upside down. We begin to forsake the relationships in our lives, the foundational values, because we want more donuts or sparkling water or whatever.
Yeah. I don't think Jason would ever forsake his creativity for a donut.
Ooh, what kind of donut? Did that fit in humor?
I stand corrected.
I think it fit in humor. Okay, good. I'm working the system.
So let's talk a little bit about your values. How did you come to these?
I came to these from Caroline, my wife. So I, like probably many men, don't think a lot about my core values and never did. And it wasn't until we started working together, living together, where she started just kind of questioning some of the things that I was doing and going, well, why are you doing that? Or why do you resist so hard against certain things? And I was like, I don't know. Like I've never really thought about defining those things. And I've never done therapy. So maybe if you do therapy, you'll run up against this stuff as well. And so really Caroline has become my therapist, which may be dangerous for a relationship, but it works out okay for us. But she actually got me to actually write these things down and to start thinking about them. And it was so helpful because even if you just say, I have 4 buckets to put values in, it gives you a container to then think about and talk about them, as opposed to this just open world of, well, I think this is what I like and I think this is what matters to me. It's like, no, you put them in these different things. So these values have become so important to us because then they become filters. So every decision you make then goes through those filters. So we all have different filters. We all have different values. So as we're going to get to, I'm sure, with my book that had all the sponsors in it, for you probably have some value that goes sponsors in a book, like bounces off of it and like ricochets somewhere far away because you would never do it.
In fact, it's so far away from that. Like I'm beginning to consider whether or not I'll ever appear on media that has advertisements.
Right.
And I'm not there yet because like we'll do the Today Show or whatever, and they make their income from advertisements, or we'll like on our YouTube channel we don't monetize it, even though we would make a lot of money doing that. It just doesn't align with my personal values. Yeah. And so. But that's a core value. It is different from the foundational value. And I think the core values, they're different for each of us. That's how all of our houses, to continue that metaphor, look different. It's not a cookie cutter life. It's okay that even my wife and my values are different from each other. Even our core values are appreciably different in a lot of cases. There's a considerable amount of overlap, but there are things that we value more or less than each other, and that's okay. I think quite often that's what makes our relationship interesting.
Yeah, and so I think the railing against advertising and sponsorship and just in general media is, I totally align with you in a lot of that. And it's interesting for me to say that as someone who sold myself to 1,600 companies for a couple years. But here's the difference for me in the way that I've reframed it, because I've actually thought about this and we haven't talked about it, but I've thought this conversation in my head with you, amongst other conversations we've had imaginarily, which is we're all advertising something.
Yeah,
so,
I don't agree with that.
But you are, if you think about it. You're advertising your Patreon, which you make money from.
No, but that's a promotion. It's different from an advertisement. But
it's apples and oranges.
No, right, and they both taste different, and some people have allergies to one.
Sure.
And I think what's different for me is I'm totally fine with promoting something that I believe in. An advertisement is different because you're being paid by an outside entity to support their product or service.
And not to cut you off, but just I've never taken a sponsor. Well, I can't say that because early on I didn't have values, so I had them, but I didn't know what they were. But very quickly, especially into my I Wear Your Shirt project, I discovered, I don't want to talk about political companies that have a political angle. I don't want to talk about companies that don't treat animals fairly or whatever. Like if there's something, I figured that out through stumbling through it and going, hold on, this feels terrible. And I kind of liken this to like the hot stove moment in all aspects of life. If you almost have to go to the place of like touching the hot stove. So like I had to take on sponsors that didn't quite align with me to understand, oh shit, these don't align with me.
Totally.
Like I had to feel that to go, this is not good. Like this is not why I started this company. It's not why I started this idea.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So iwearyourshirt.com was the initial idea or the impetus of this. And you basically wore a different shirt every day with someone's company logo or name on it, website, whatever. I assume you got this idea from NASCAR.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it stems back to I was a designer and we had clients, and so they would call us. This is 2006, 2007, and we would have these client calls. We would talk about design, and then we just kind of like BS at the end of them. And they're like, "Hey, Jason, like you seem like a forward-thinking guy. Like, what's Facebook? What's Twitter? Should we be on these things?" And I didn't know what they were. And this is 2006, 2007. No one really did.
Yeah.
And I started looking and I was like, this is really interesting. There's a lot of people sitting on these platforms. And then you have these businesses who I actually did like and appreciate that there's not really an in-between of them. But you see it everywhere else. You see it on radio, TV, billboards, like all this other stuff. And so I just saw this opportunity of kind of combining these two or meeting these two in between. And the t-shirt thing just happened from going into my closet one day. And just like you said earlier in this was, we all wear t-shirts. We're all promoting some brand without even knowing it, whether it has a logo or not. Like, you bought it and you're wearing it. And if someone asked you, you'd say, like, oh, this is this company.
Right.
Or if you make it yourself, you'd say it's my company. And I just thought, oh, this could be a really interesting way to do this and to wear a shirt every day with a brand on it. And the whole idea for me was I just wanted to be a storyteller in between the brand and the people who were on social media. Why I thought I should do this, I had no idea. It was just, I think, being super naive when I was 25 or whatever, and just decided to try it and do it. And it was a miserable failure in the beginning because no one cared. Why would anyone care? But then it started to pick up a little bit of traction. And I had this pricing structure that was super unique. So it was $1 on the first day, $2 on the second day, $3 on the third day.
So January 1st, 2nd,
exactly.
et cetera. Yeah.
So that kind of bump sale pricing, as I call it now, that really got people to go, oh, sure, I'll spend $13 for you to wear my shirt. Like, go be an idiot on the internet. Like, let's see what happens. Yeah. But it spiraled and it started to pick up traction and people started talking about it. And I really did run into quickly a couple different things, but the main one was, oh crap, I don't want to wear shirts for companies I don't like. But I also wore shirts for Shopify before Shopify was what we know it was now. This is 2009. So I love that I got to promote those types of companies. I helped Nissan launch a car via a shirt. So like, those are the stories that for me are just so fun. Now, am I upset that I wore some crappier ones? Yeah, sure. But I also had a lot of good
about
stuff.
some of those, like were lessons you learned from ones that were crappier, as you call it.
Yeah, it's actually more like one that comes to mind. There was a beef jerky company, which is no longer in business, surprisingly, but the owner was just a jerk. And so like, I had a live show that I did every single day for an hour, and they came in and like, they sent me like 10 pounds of beef jerky. And at the time I ate meat quite a bit, so I was fine with it. I was super excited. And they were just like, you're not eating the jerky. You're not talking about how great it is. And I'm like, listen, who can eat 10 pounds of jerky at one time? Like, this is not healthy. Why are you trying to get me to do this? But then they just were also, they expected everything for the like $50 that they paid or whatever. And so I started to realize I had to put some systems in place that got people to understand you're paying X to get these deliverables. Everything else on top of that is just kind of gravy. Now, the funny part is that like 20 people bought the beef jerky like on the live show. So they made more than their money back, but they were just a really bad client. So I just learned lessons about how to mitigate those ahead of time, and then just realizing like, I probably don't want to talk about like a food company and then have to feel like I have to eat 10 pounds of something on a live show. I won't last.
Do you still have like 3 pounds of beef jerky left over?
I donated it all to the garbage can because the person was a jerk.
You're reminding me of one of my favorite podcasts. There's this sort of dissidence that we were talking about earlier, is called the Culture Gab Fest. And I often hear them railing against corporations, which Ryan and I, we're often mistaken. Like, people think that we rail against corporations or we think that they're evil. I don't think they're evil. I think corporations are inherently problematic, and I hate that word, but I think that there's a problem because by definition, a corporation, we actually missed the beginning part there. It's a for-profit corporation. There are two types of corporations. It's for-profit and non-profit, right? And then there are subsets beyond that. But for-profit corporations have to, with the exception of B Corps, they have to put their profits first. In fact, they have a fiduciary responsibility to do that, and that, when it is your primary responsibility, the reason you exist is not to add value, to contribute, to be a part of service, it is just to make money, then you often end up sacrificing your values, and that is a problem. So when I hear the Culture Gab Fest, I hear them railing against a corporation, and then all of a sudden, I shit you not, it's like, this episode is brought to you by Exxon.
Yeah, or Goldman Sachs is the new one for me. Every podcast I hear that's brought to you by Goldman Sachs, like, wow, it stuns me. And it's even people that like, and I'll just say it, how I built this. Like, that whole podcast is about like small, like almost nothing businesses growing into big things. And I'm like, you're talking about a company that was a big part of the economic meltdown in 2008.
Yeah.
And your show is about the economic buildup of companies and businesses, and the alignment of that, or the incongruency of that, man, that hurts. And I think as consumers, that is where I do side with you a lot on making the decision to go, well, I'm opting out of that. I'm opting out of that podcast. I'm opting out of that business. I'm opting out of those things. And just like you, I try and make all the best decisions possible, but I also have an iPhone in my pocket. I also have these things, but it's because without those things, I can't do what I'm trying to do and put that out into the world. And so I know that there's a necessary evil to some of it, but it doesn't mean that all of those things are necessarily evil, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's the thing I would say about corporations is I don't find corporations to be evil. In fact, I think they're a part of everyday life. And the thing with minimalism is not about us removing ourselves from all of the existing systems. It's about how can we live better within them, and how can we question them in a way that is useful. And that's the other thing. It's not about what's the term that Jonathan Haidt has, and he has a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. He talks about I want to say social terrorism, but that's not it. It's where he talks about basically, people are using social media now to, and also our institutions like academia to basically hold hostage conversation and instead intimidate. Social intimidation is a thing where people come out and act as if they are trying to have a conversation but really they're trying to be the morality police. My view is correct, and anyone who questions it then is therefore not just incorrect but evil. And I think that becomes really dangerous because it blocks the path toward communication, toward a more meaningful interaction with these things. So you and I can sit here and have a conversation about advertisements. And by the way, if it does sound like semantics, and if we're using the terms promotion and advertisements interchangeably, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I tend to make a distinction. We have a long essay on our website called "Can We Have an Honest Conversation About Advertisements?" And the thesis of that is, well, first off, advertisements suck. That is our thesis.
Totally agree with you.
But we also want to acknowledge that in some cases they're somewhat useful, and there are some advertisements that are actually better than other advertisements. And I actually find some value, especially in living in Los Angeles. The billboards here are way better than in Jacksonville, Florida.
They have to be, though. It's right. It's the own your weird mentality in billboards. So it's like, if you don't do your billboard differently here, no one will notice it because there are so many. So you have to stand out. You have to do it differently. And I do think that there is something really interesting about the semantics of this, is that you have to come to terms with what matters to you and what you do every single day of your life. And if you don't, then you're going to find yourself unhappy, making bad choices, making, enemies of people. I don't know if people are actually making enemies, but you know what I mean. And I think for me, I've just really come to terms with some of these things where I know that you and I aren't in alignment with some of the projects that I've done, but I think we're still in alignment as people because our core values are still in alignment.
Yeah.
And we can have a conversation about this where we go back and forth, and we may even leave and go, I still disagree with him on this, but I still like you. Like, I still want to have dinner with you later. Like, I'm not going to cancel it. I mean, maybe, I don't know. Depends on what you say.
Well, I think the thing to point out here is when we're talking about whether it's marketing or promotions or advertisements, these are our opinions with respect to them, and it's not black or white. Where I say advertisements suck, what I mean that first off, it's slightly hyperbolic, that and it's supposed to evoke some sort of emotion when we say that. But what I'm really saying is they suck to me, and my life would probably be better if I didn't see the 5,000 advertisements I see every day. But living in LA, I'm still better off seeing the advertisements here than when you were in Jacksonville, Florida, and it's like ambulance chaser and then like
vasectomy doctor.
right. And
that's all it is.
And the ones here, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that, whatever, Stranger Things was out, and so I probably do get more value. I think it's probably still errors on the side of I get less value and they are more intrusive, and I really do think they are the greatest problem with respect to our current media landscape. They hold people hostage because you can't talk about certain things. You become we've used this term now. We've turned the word platform into a verb. I can't believe you're giving this person a platform, or you're platforming this person. And as soon as I start hearing words like that, I'm like, oh, you have an agenda. What you're trying to do is you are in essence actually trying to deplatform someone else, and I get really turned off by that because it becomes that social interference that that doesn't lend itself to conversation at all. And that's why I think conversations like these are really important, because they're helpful to people. We're not beholden to anyone. Like, yeah, we have another film coming out with Netflix, and it's great. But if they were to come to us tomorrow and be like, "Hey, we don't want to do this film with you," I'd be like, "All right, that's fine with me." Like, I would prefer to have it on Netflix, because they actually, one of the great, their great pitch to us is, "Hey, we don't do advertisements," it's better to show up here than if you guys were to do a TV deal with Bravo, and all of a sudden it's like, "Hey, The Minimalists brought to you by Tide." And that just wouldn't work for us necessarily. Yeah. I think this is probably a good time to transition to how we met, which was in 2013. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Can I tell your story?
Yeah.
So we both were asked to speak at this conference, Fargo, North Dakota, called MisfitCon. Unfortunately, MisfitCon doesn't happen anymore, but a beautiful event, an amazing event.
It was 3 years, and then it was done. And like, there's something, I really miss it. Yeah. And in fact, it's the only it set the bar so high that I don't think I've ever been to any other conference where.
So, incredible shout out to AJ Leon and Melissa Leon. At some point, you haven't had AJ on the show or Melissa on the show.
No, he's in our documentary though. And I think it tends to be people's favorite part of the documentary.
He's unbelievable. He's just one of my favorite humans ever, and you guys are too. So, but so I was a speaker in 2013, but this was at the end of my I Wear Your Shirt business. So this business had made $1.2 million. I had grown it to 8 people because I thought I had to scale up. I'd worked with 1,600 brands, 10 of which were in the Fortune 100. I was just feeling like I was doing everything right, but then the business crumbled in 2012. And so in 2013, I'd let everyone go. I had $124,000 in debt. I'd gained 50 pounds, and I was miserable. I mean, truthfully, like without Caroline, I probably would have gone to a dark place. So I give her a lot of credit for that. So I get asked to speak at this event. You guys probably don't know this. Many people who were at Misfit don't. I had to ask them to pay for my plane ticket because I did not have money on a credit card I could afford it. And Melissa paid for it. So that was incredible. No. So I showed up, and I'm feeling like a fraud from the second I get there, because I'm like, why am I going to speak? Like, everything I've done, like, I'm falling apart. So I hear you speak, and you tell your story of climbing the corporate ladder, buying the bigger house, spending all the money, doing all things, getting into debt. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm not as handsome and my hair is not even close to as great as this guy, but this is like, I can feel my story in this. And I just remember when you finished talking, I just felt like this was a shift in me of, I have to do something to change this. And, you talked about minimalism, you talked about Ryan. I was like, well, where's this Ryan guy? Like, why isn't he here? And luckily he came the next year. So I got to meet him. But I was so moved by this conversation. And when you guys were talking about, minimalism is not a new thing. And the reason for me why I've seen from the outside why minimalism has become kind of like the zeitgeist in society now is because enough people are talking about it in their own unique ways that it's resonating so much with different people. Exactly. So the way you guys talk about it resonates so well with me, but like a Leo Babauta, it doesn't resonate with me. Yeah. And that to me is the shift that I found. So when we were at this event, when I finally got up on stage, super felt like a fraud then afterwards. But now my mind is spinning of like, I need to change my life. I need to do, uproot everything. So Srini, who has a podcast as well, he was there. He was just going to do a Q&A with me and start asking questions. And I just blacked out. Like, I didn't physically blacked out, but I kind of went to this place where the transparency core value first emerged. And I just unloaded on everybody and was like, my business is failing. I'm in debt. I'm feeling terrible. I feel like a fraud for even being here. And I remember for like 45 minutes, I don't know what I said. But at the end, people were crying and clapping. Now, that's just also Misfit. It wasn't just me. Yeah. Like, that happened with every talk.
Well, the beautiful thing about I mean, I don't know how many people were there that first year, but he
under 100.
Yeah, but that was intentional. Like, and so you're with this crowd. Let's say it was roughly, with the people he had volunteering and stuff, maybe 120 people there total. But he did that. He curated that audience. Like, everyone had to apply, and like, if you wanted to be there, there was a long waiting list of people who wanted to be there beyond the 120 who were there. But when you arrived, you didn't know who was a speaker, who was an audience, because you weren't. I didn't feel delineated. Like, I didn't feel like I was a speaker there. I just felt like I was part of this conference, and that was nice, because Ryan and I go speak at different conferences now, and you feel like, okay, no, I'm part of the speakers bureau or whatever. Yeah. But there, I just felt like I was a participating member, and part of my participation meant I stood up and talked about whatever I talked about. I don't even remember what I talked about.
No, so you told your story.
I think it's great that I'm really grateful that it affected you in any way at all, but I don't even remember like giving the talk. I remember the conference. significantly, and the impression that it made on me, but I don't remember my participation that much at all. It's great that I had any value at all.
Yeah, and I remember meeting Colin there as well, and Colin told his story, and my buddy Greg Hartle, who I'm still incredibly good friends with, told his story, and just all these people in this special event. And I think, like, again, I don't mean to keep going back to my book. I'm not trying to shill it, but this conference was so weird, right? Like, this conference owned its weird so hard.
Yes.
From the chairs that were borrowed from people who lived in town. They weren't the crappy chairs that we all sit in. The food was made there. You sat around, you ate with everybody. You didn't know who the speakers were. That never happens at events. And even in the boring moments of the conference, what did AJ do? He had a slam poet doing slam poetry while we were all milling around waiting for something to happen. And it was all of these things that event, it gives me chills thinking about it, because I will never go to an event as great as that event was. And all I had, the part of it was, I begged them to pay for my plane ticket so that I could go, because I had a story to tell, and then my life changed after that event. And it really, I think those things in life, if you can find those things, you search for them and you try and go to them and you show up for them. And you may be an introvert and you don't want to go to a conference because you feel, but if it feels like, man, there could be something to this, like this is different, this is weird, this could change me, you got to lean into those things.
Yeah, I remember getting asked to go to the conference, and we said no. We said no once, twice, 3 times. I said no because I was like in a play, so I had an obligation. Like I had to, I had performances that I had to go to, so it was an easy no for me. For Josh and Colin, you just don't tell AJ no.
No,
you can't. You can't.
Well, you can try.
You could try, yeah.
Well, can I tell you why we said no originally? We Googled Misfit Conference, and it was something in Texas that was like a church revival group, and I'm like, they're not going to pay us to come out, and like we have to find our own transportation, and I'm like, I don't know about that. But anyway, like we ended up eventually figuring out what it was, and it was Colin and we just drove from Missoula to Fargo, which is like an 18-hour drive.
And then they came back just like raving about how awesome the conference was, and then I was super jealous that I didn't go. And then I went 2014, and it was amazing. But you know what? I mean, it did only happen 3 years, but there's something beautiful about that conference being a temporary thing.
Absolutely.
Because I'll tell you, there are, and I'm not going to name them because I don't want to put down other conferences I've been to. There are other conferences I've been to, like the first year they were, inceptionized, the second year, and then like by the third year, I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to this thing anymore. This is not what it was when it first started. And there's something about AJ and Melissa like just doing 3 years of it and kind of walking away and leaving us talking about it, about how this is the best conference we've ever been to. Like that, if we ever do a conference, it's going to be, that's what it'll be, like 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
We say the same thing for our Wandering Aimfully community. That's the membership group that my wife and I run. They ask us all the time, are you guys going to do events? Because we try and curate an online community that feels different and feels weird and feels unique. And so everyone kind of knows if you guys do an event, it's going to be so weird and so unique, but we just haven't found the time and availability to do it. And we know the undertaking that even just a percentage of Misfit, what it would take to do that. And I would want to do it differently, right? I don't want to, confuse what we would do with Misfit. But you're right. I think there's something so interesting about in-person connection that we've lost when it comes to social media, when it comes to online businesses, when it comes to even podcasting and YouTube. This connection that literally we're going to have today, I know is going to deepen our relationship for years. And you guys have done that on the road for however many stops you've done, hundreds at this point. Yeah. And that's, I think, how your community has grown so strong. And it's how I think people lose sight of getting started in business or building relationships is, I'll just stay online. And you can't just stay online. You have to show up to certain things, as uncomfortable as it might be, because it will deepen the connection so much.
Yeah, I think online sort of augments and it can amplify significantly what you're doing.
Yeah,
and
it's
I
an
think
accent.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
and it can become a large part of what you do, but also realizing it all started with with Ryan, whether it's his packing party, like that wasn't an online thing. It was me and him in his condo, boxing up a bunch of stuff, pretending he was moving. Like there was nothing online about it. In fact, we filmed parts of it and lost the camera to it.
Like you lost my book. I get it. There's a theme.
No, I think Ryan was just ashamed of the footage.
Oh, it was so bad. It was so bad. Yeah, no, I definitely lost that on purpose. Yeah.
Jordan and I were talking before this. I was talking about my flip cam that I recorded all of my first I Wear Your Shirt videos on. Was a flip cam.
Oh,
and
wow.
That's what this was.
Yeah.
what he
Yeah.
had.
I didn't tell any of the sponsors that paid me that was what I was going to use, but it's all I could afford and it's what I could figure out. And yeah, I think you just have to start that way. But I think even that, like the packing party example, is such a great example of that creates such a memorable experience that you couldn't have just by maybe like watching a YouTube video and doing it on your own. When you have other people that are there, that texture, that context, it all just layers in and becomes something that you never forget. And it's why you guys continue to talk about it, because then I have a relation to that story where I think like, oh, should I do a packing party with like my close friend? And we talk about it like in the book. I wrote about minimalism, and my flavor of minimalism is kind of how I've thought about it over the years, because I don't want to just copy you guys. I want to figure out my own thing. And I talked about like us going in our closet and like doing a closet clean out and making a rule afterwards of the 1 in, 1 out rule. So like when we buy anything, if one thing comes in, one thing has to leave.
Yeah.
And so that's just like a hard and fast rule for us. But we figured out our own way to do that now creates our own context. So when people hear our stories, they go, oh, I want to do the 1 in, 1 out rule or the capsule wardrobe or like any of these things that we all hear about. It just creates that kind of connection to that person. But it does kind of start in person, not just in an online thing.
Dude, I love when I hear people like coming up with their own recipes, because if someone came to me, they're like, I did my packing party, and next I'm going to write a book, and then I'm going to do a podcast just like you and Josh, and then I'm planning on doing a documentary. Like that's conforming, really.
Yeah.
But like hearing people like come up to me and they're like, Ryan, I really like what you do. I agree with about 50% of what you say. And
Me too.
right.
Half of what he says.
Right, exactly.
You guys keep talking. I'm gonna use the bathroom.
Okay. Yeah, no, I love that, man, because when someone comes up to me and they say, I agree with half of what you do, for me, like that is telling me like, okay, great, I'm giving you tools to think for yourself. And I think that's what you're doing, man. You're giving, like, that's what Own Your Weird does. Like it is showing people how to think for themselves, to think outside the box. You're not giving a recipe in here, you're giving your recipe, but there are certainly ingredients that people can take from. And that, to me, that is what meaningful work is, man, is when you're able to give people some ingredients to help form their own recipes.
The subtitle of the book before, and the reason it's not the subtitle is because we could never get a good version of it, was the anti-blueprint to life, success, and relationships, something like that. And it just never quite, because it was like, well, why would you pick up the book if it's not going to help you at all? But it's kind of the thing that I weave through there, which is, if someone just follows the minimalism path that you guys have laid out, it won't be as great for them. I think starting with a packing party or with the minimalism game is just such a great start to it. Then you figure out your flavor of it. And so for me, everything that I've written in the book, and I say this in the very beginning, is these are my stories, but it's not about me. I wrote this book for you. And it's for you to figure out, based on all the weird things that I've done in life, business, relationships, love, all of that, what is your version of that just makes you feel whole, that makes you feel great? And again, it goes back to the very beginning of this chat. Like, it's not going to feel like an overnight change. It's not going to happen that way. But if you start to have that mental shift of, oh, you know what? I do have some toxic relationships around me. I need to change some of those. And maybe it's getting rid of one bad friend who just never supports anything that I do. And we've had that. Like, we've all had that situation we've had to come up against.
Yeah.
And so I think it's this constant idea of you're creating your own, what I like to think of as your treasure map in life. And so there's no straight line. It's a curved, dotted map with like a shipwreck and a kraken and like all these things, and whatever visual metaphors you want. That to me is how I look at life. And I think so many people think it's going to be a straight line when I buy into minimalism or when I buy into whatever the next thing is. And it's not. It's your own dotted journey. It's your own kind of weaving path. And that's just what I try and help people do. And there's little exercises in the book that do that as well. But I think you guys have found that too, is you have to just discover your own little isms, but maybe you start with something that feels like, okay, this gives me a foundation to get going.
Yeah, I mean, like the packing party, I started with that because it was a surefire way for me to change my state and for me to help me see a different perspective on what I was doing with my life. And I think that's what the packing party story does. That's what the surfer app last name, that's what that story does. I mean, it helps people kind of look through a different lens of how they can approach different problems. But I'll tell you, man, what I like about how you talk about your life and what you go into the book is it's not just this story about winning. It's not just about how Jason woke up one day and he was like, I'm going to win. Yeah. And then tomorrow I won some more. And then the next day I won more. It is this a story with a little bit of struggle in there. And I think that's what really makes for a good story, man. And like to be open to talk about MisfitCon and how you had to, you know, practically beg Melissa to pay for your plane ticket. I mean, those are the stories that people need to hear because we've all been there, man.
Yeah. I think we all deal with the ups and downs of life in different ways. And I've just found that the more that I share, not all of it, because you just don't want to share everything that goes wrong, but the more that I share when things go wrong, the more that you realize other people show up and go, I really resonate with that. Like now I don't see you as just this guy who does these weird things. I see you as another human, and I see you as a flawed human just like me, and you mess up, and you know, everything isn't going right for you. And what we were just talking about is how, you know, it's not just all a bunch of wins in life. And so I think for me, I love the transparency part of sharing the ups and downs. You know, I now wear it as a badge of honor that I got into debt. At the time, it was miserable. But now I love talking about it because I've gotten through that. I looked at it as a game. I thought about it as the original Donkey Kong with little Mario jumping over the barrels. And every level that he climbed up a ladder was one credit card I paid off. And so that creating that game metaphor, it actually helped me get out of debt. And it helped me figure out, oh, this doesn't have to be crushing. It doesn't have to like rip my soul out of my body, because that's what it felt like. And I don't have to be ashamed of it. I can reframe this. And that's so much of just thinking about life that way in every instance of business. Like, how can I reframe how we think about writing a book? And so that's why I did the sponsorship thing in the first book. And all of these little reframings for me have really helped things become successful, but also have things where people can really relate to them, because then they go, oh, I've thought about doing something that way, or any of those different things that people might say to you, like you guys have probably gotten tons of like, oh, I wanted to do the same thing, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, there's a difference between thinking about doing something and actually doing the thing. And it's not going to be easy, but you do get a lot of rewards just by going through the ups and downs of it.
Yeah.
With all the different things that you do, it also adds nuance to your story, because you might, to a lot of people, be known as the I wear your shirt guy, or we'll talk about your last names here in a second. But as Ryan and I were most known as the Minimalists, and that has been a great Trojan horse for us to get in here and talk about whatever we want to talk about, whether it's non-conformity, or we're talking about religion, or we're talking about
meditation,
values,
architecture, like
all these things that we have the opportunity to talk about, because we're the minimalists. Minimalism ends up being 20 to 30% of what we actually talk about, but we talk about all these other things that are sort of adjacent to that. So your story becomes more nuanced as you grow. When we met, what was your last name?
Last name was headsets.com when we met in 2013.
So well, let's talk about this journey, because you've had at least 4 different last names.
6 total. Yeah.
You had 6?
So this is why I sold my last name. So this is why for me this decision was easy. So 2012 I was on my 3rd last name. So a couple stepfathers. I don't get my sense of identity from Nicodemus. I don't get it from Milburn. I haven't had it my whole life. So I found some of my identity through the I Wear Your Shirt project, because I was putting myself out there. I was figuring out who I was finding these core values. Caroline was really helping me with all of this stuff. And I started to realize, like, okay, I'm a weirdo. Like, I'm just a weird person. And this is part of what I love about even myself. And that sounds weird to say, but it really was helpful to think about it that way. But so getting to the last name. So 2012, my mom wanted me to hop on Skype. And this is where like the bass drop comes in. And I've never been on Skype with my mom ever. And so I'm like, this is kind of weird. So I hop on, and just tears in her eyes in the video. And I think everyone listening to this can relate to, like, you've had that moment with your feeling like, uh-oh, like, what's going on? She was like, I'm getting a divorce from your stepfather. They've been together for like 13 years at the time. And she was crushed. And the circumstances were not good. So, I'm just trying to be lighthearted and add some levity. And I was like, all right, well, screw this guy. I'm going to sell his last name and, like, shove it in his face. Because I was really deep in the I Wear Your Shirt thing at the time. And so my mom was like, oh, that's funny. Like, that brought this idea. Then I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then I was like, well, hold on. Now I don't want this last name.
So wait, that was your second last
Third.
name? So wait, can we go back to the beginning?
So
you were born with a last name.
I was born with a last name like most people. So I was Jason Stein when I was born. That lasted, I think, like 8 or 9 years. And I became Jason Hanchy. So that was Mom's second husband. That one was a tough one. That one always messed up when people called. Then it was Jason Sadler. So that was what, like, my name everywhere was. And so that name is where I ran into the divorce, the call with Mom.
And you weren't paid for any of these last
names? These were all just, charitable donations that I gave away. So I ran into this situation where I went, I really don't want this last name. I don't want any of the previous last names I had. how do you find a lot? Do I just grab the white pages? Is that still a thing? Like, do I just flip through and like, okay, that one. And I just said, I've been getting all this-
tutu. All right.
okay, yeah. I've been getting all of these sponsors for all this other stuff in my life, not just the t-shirt thing. I had Road Trip and a fitness challenge. And all. I was like, what if I just had a sponsored last name for a year? I'm not selling my soul. I'm not giving this up forever. It's not a tattoo on my forehead. And would people pay for this? And so I bought the domain, buymylastname.com. Shockingly available, guys. I don't know why. No one had done this before. And I built a little auction site, started at $0, said it was going to be available for 30 days, sent an email to a small list of 600 people. That was it. That's all the email list I had. And I thought it would sell for $5,000. I was like, okay, I have enough notoriety with this I Reassure thing. I've had enough sponsors. $5,000 would be a great win. Cool story, whatever. At the end of 24 hours, the bidding was over $30,000.
Wow.
And I was floored. I was like, what? Like, this is crazy. But I will
were some
say,
of the companies who were bidding upwards of $30,000?
I did two fun things that I will give myself a little bit of credit for. One was we had a leaderboard of the people who bid, so you could actually see the names as they came in. And second was we had a fan leaderboard of what names they wanted.
Oh,
now,
wow.
I was smart enough
That's
that I
great.
had a developer filter out all the words that you would think would be up there. But number one the entire time was Jason Cheez-Its. That was number one, like, fan voted. And I was for it. I was like, yes, let's do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just a bunch of like, my buddy Alan was a real estate guy, so he wanted like Alan Evans Real Estate would have been my last name. I was actually in talks with Ford for a little while, but their promotion schedule for their stuff was like 3 years ahead. So they were trying to think like, what could we squeeze in? Like, we can't do it. It's too like fast. But I had like, there was a bunch of like,
Wait, that would have been like an easy out though. Like, I'm Jason Ford.
well, they wanted to do it with a specific vehicle. So like, this was actually like
Jason
before
Expedition.
Yeah, exactly. Like Ford Expedition.
Yeah.
But no, and there was a lot of verbiage on the site of like, I'm not going to represent political stuff. So I'd learned, right, through the first couple of years, the things I didn't want. Like nothing political, nothing offensive, nothing like,
divisive. Yeah.
exactly. And so I ended up at the last couple minutes of the auction getting a phone call. I don't even know how the guy got my number. And he was like, hey, I think his name was, I forget his name, Brian or something. He was like, hey, I'm from headsets.com. We are a real company. I've already overbid my budget that my boss gave me on your last name, which was $40,000. He was like, if I spend $5,000 more, can you guarantee me that I will win? And I was like, I can't. But if you just bid at the last minute, like odds are good. And he was like, all right, fine. And like hung up the phone. I thought I pissed him off. And then I saw the bid come in at the end. And so that's what it became, was Jason Headsets DOTCOM.
And this is on your driver's license and everything.
I went down to the courthouse. So that's how the book opens, is like me sitting in court with my lawyer in front of a judge, him asking me like, have you been convicted of any felonies? Are you trying to leave the country? And I'm just sitting there going like, what is, oh, he thinks I'm like trying to like escape like fraud or something else.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I'm just an idiot. Like I just wanted a new last name and make money from it. So that was how the last name got sold. So I changed it legally everywhere. I would check in at hotels and I'd give them my driver's license and they'd be like, no, this has your business on it. What's your name? And I'm like, no, that's a driver's license. Like that's legit my last name. And lived with this sponsored last name for a year and then became Surfer App, which was the cover of my first book. So I thought it would be fun to sell it again because the cover of a first book is pretty good notoriety. So that's why I did it a second time. And then the new last name is my great-grandfather's last name, who actually was an entrepreneur. I didn't know anything about him, and my grandmother actually told me his story, and I was like, oh, I want to keep this name going because it stopped with him. So that's where Zook came in.
That's great.
Is Zook here to stay?
Zook is here to stay. Yeah, I went through the gamut of changing my last name too many times. 6 last names is enough for a lifetime, I think.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a lot. But again, like it just, when you know the whole story, it becomes so much easier not to go, oh, you're just an asshole who sold his last name. It's like, oh, I kind of get it. Like with everything you were doing and going through, like kind of makes sense. You know, and just having some of those values in place of not just taking any last name. Headsets.com was actually a great company. Their CEO is awesome. Surfer App was 2 guys who wanted to start a surfing app, and they just were looking for a way to get some exposure. They got a New York Times article out of it. Like there was a lot of really cool stuff that happened with that story. So it was
They
fun.
still around?
They're still around. It never kind of did what they hoped they wanted it to do, but they still super happy with it. Like they never could have gotten their name in the New York Times and in the front of the business section. So it worked out.
Yeah.
And last, before we dive into some more questions here, you did a project called Buy My Future. And it's not what you would think. They don't like own you.
Yeah. And again, I've learned from these things, right? Like what started out as a kitschy idea to wear t-shirts for a living, I picked up some business things along the way, and I only did that through failing miserably quite a bit. But with the Buy My Future idea, so after I Wear Your Shirt stopped, after the last name stuff was done, I wanted some easy wins, guys. Like, this stuff was difficult, and it takes a lot of energy to pour yourself into all these projects. And I started seeing online courses coming about, and I was like, oh, I really like teaching what I've learned. And I do think that there's something really interesting about the education system being uprooted, and being a weird way to learn is you go on YouTube and you watch a bunch of videos, or you go on Skillshare or whatever, or you buy a writing course if someone has a writing course that you want to take. And so
HowToWriteBetter.org.
and there's an advertisement for you. Ooh, coming back.
Oh, it's a promotion. No one paid me to place that here.
So anyway, I started creating some courses, and I started creating some software applications, and I just saw that I had too many things that I was trying to promote and to try and get people to sign up for and pay that were a good exchange of value, I thought. And I realized there's got to be a better way than having 8 things I'm constantly promoting or talking about. Like, I feel like every tweet I have to put out is something to promote something else, because that was just the way that I had done it for years. And so I was drinking coffee one morning, and I thought to myself, what if I just bundled all this shit together? Like, what if I just made one package of things, because people seem to like multiple of them, and I kind of gave maximum value of all of my stuff, and then I got maximum customer value with one price for these things. And the future element became the hook. So it was buy all these things for a great price, but also get anything I make in the future at no cost forever. And there are some caveats, right? Like, I wrote this book. I can't give everyone a copy of the printed book because I would have to pay that out of pocket. So there are some things that people know that, like, I can't do. But if I make an online course, you get it. Like, as soon as it's done, it's easy to give you. And so I thought this would sell like 10 or 20 spots, and it would just be a nice jump. And 178 people bought it for $1,000.
Wow.
And that reaction is the same that I had.
It's incredible, yeah.
And it actually created this really cool community of people who just opted in and said, I like what you're doing. You know, it's my own version of a Patreon, right? It's just a unique way. It's a weird way to do that. And that project evolved from Buy My Future to Buy Our Future with my wife. And now it's our Wandering Aimfully community. It's essentially the same thing. Just trying to make things simpler, even though we do have a lot of projects, just bringing them all together in one place and just kind of putting those things on a different tilt than most people would.
Let's dive into some of these questions here. Dana says, sometimes I feel isolated or weird for not following the status quo. Could you offer suggestions for overcoming those feelings? And so we've obviously touched on this at least somewhat orthogonally to what Dana's question, but the word that stood out here is feelings. Like, she's mistaking, I think, like feeling weird with feeling bad. Like, if I feel weird, then thus I must feel bad.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she's feeling different, or so. Another word that stands out is isolated. So I know that when I feel really different, I start to feel like I am isolated from everyone else. I mean, my biggest piece of advice is own it.
Nice.
You got to own your weird.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what your book is about. So it's not about finding a way to conform to others. It's more about showing to others why you being uniquely you is a good thing.
Yeah. It's also about understanding that you are fighting a little bit of our human instinct. So we've had the herd mentality for as long as we've been on this planet.
Yeah.
And when you go away from the herd, that's going against our built-in instincts. And so in the time that we live now, it's actually much easier to go against the herd, because it's not just leaving the tribe and now you're against the herd. It's saying something different on social media, starting a different business, leaving your 9-to-5 job to start a unicorn furniture company that you wanted to start. It's any of these things. And if you do take a moment to go, oh, you know what, this is probably a little bit of human instinct that I'm kind of going against, that's okay. You know, it's going to feel a little bit different to stand out from other people. That's all right. I can kind of take that in and just kind of have a moment with it, and then have a little gratitude that I even have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And I tend to have that every day, because I know that I'm extremely lucky to be born in the time, and maybe fortunate, better than lucky, but to be born in the time that I was born in, so that I have the ability to do the things that I've done with the mechanisms in place of social media and those things. So I think you're totally right. I think it does boil down to the feeling that you have is a little bit separate from maybe just what is around you, and then just accepting that that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's what's fascinating here is some people can feel isolated. Other people in the same circumstance can feel significant. Because like it's a weird thing that we have. We have this desire for connection. We want to be similar enough to other people that we feel connected to them. But at the same time, we have this desire to feel significant or unique, because you don't want to be completely like everyone else, because then you don't feel like your life is even worthwhile. Well, what makes me different at all? And so I think part of just embracing that other side, instead of using words like weird, if that is turning you off, like you've embraced the word weird and as a good thing.
Yep.
But if there's a bridge for you, maybe the bridge is like, well, I'm unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that will help you own your uniqueness first before
Absolutely.
you can ultimately own your weird.
Yeah, and I think you got to look at too, like, why you are unique, instead of like looking at the what am I and what other people view me as. It's why am I the way I am. And if you can look in the mirror and feel good about what you're doing, like, and why you're doing it, that's some good leverage too.
Alan asks, it can seem like you're all alone by taking steps. See, with these isolation terms, right? You're all alone by taking steps to completely go against the status quo. What are some tips for finding a new community when going against what most people would normally do?
Dude, this is like the age to find a new community. I mean, we are living in the time where I feel like it's really, really easy to find people who are like you. I mean, 100 years ago, I mean, you can't just go to meetup.com and find people who are interested in the things you're interested in. You can't just, go to Facebook and find groups that you can fit into. So, I mean, I think if you're going to find a new community, like now's the time to do it.
Yeah, to me, there really is a push and pull with social media of I see the bad of it very easily, but I also see the good of it very easily. Mm-hmm. And it just becomes very simple to find your group online by searching for your group and by looking into those things. And it's like we talked about with MisfitCon. Like, we wouldn't have known that would have been so great for us had we not gone, I'm going to take a chance on this.
Right.
And by taking that chance, you realize, oh, wow, this is really great. But sometimes you take that chance and it doesn't pay off. And you just have to take more chances and hope that they pay off than you do that don't. And you're going to run into that.
And also realizing the sunk cost of, like, don't hold on to, like, okay, I took that chance, but now I have to stick with that community because I tried it out and I've already invested 3 weeks of my life into this. And so now I'm stuck with it forever. No. That's a sunk cost. You've invested the time. Be willing to walk away at any time if it's no longer adding value. The same is true with some of the conferences you talked about, Ryan. Like, if you go to a conference 1 year and it's great, and the second year it's just okay, and the third year and you're like, well, wait a minute.
This has turned into a networking event.
Right. Or it could be that you're just no longer getting what you initially got from it. And that's you don't go to kindergarten for 3 years and expect to have, like, the third year of kindergarten be as equally beneficial as the first year. Sometimes you outgrow the thing. You got what you needed to get from the community, and now it's time to maybe go start your own community or be a leader as opposed to someone who's just embedded in a particular community.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add is, like, you've got to let go of any expectation too. Like, when you are reaching out to a new community, like, you have to alleviate as many expectations as possible. Be open and be, ready for anything. But if I wanted to go, join a knitting meetup group and I thought, like, this is it, like, I'm really passionate about knitting and this is going to be it, and then I go there and I don't like the people in the group, I'm actually not that passionate about it, I could very easily start to get down on, oh man, that's what I get for branching out.
Yeah.
It's like you can't get down on yourself if you try something new and you don't like it or the community is not right for you. That's okay. Like, go out and do that 10 more times. Like, go out and fail as much as possible when trying to join a new community. Actually expect to fail. Maybe that's what it is. Like, maybe that have to be the expectation, because you're probably going to get much better than that.
And if you think about giving more than you get when you join a new community. So we have a community, we have a paid community that people can join, and they ask us all the time, how can I get the most out of this community? And I'm like, you're thinking about it wrong. Yeah. You need to show up for other people because you're new. So you need to give value before you can get value from this. And when you do, we see it every time. When someone shows up and they're answering questions, they're being helpful, they're not asking for anything, people love those people. But when you show up to the party and you run in and you're like, I've got a thing, look at my thing, and you take that thing with however you want to take it, people just go like, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you being that way? And so I really do think with any of these communities, having that mindset of, you're going to fail, you may not find the right one, let go of sunk cost bias, but also let me show up and actually give some value here.
Yeah.
and not just take as soon as I get here. And I think that's really an important mindset for trying to find your place where you don't feel isolated, is you showing up and being helpful too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when in doubt, find ways to contribute, and I think you'll start to find a community. Because, by the way, you also start to feel the fulfillment that you get from giving that you cannot get from just consuming or taking. James asks, I come from a family of wildly successful individuals. Sometimes I feel like I'm standing in the shadow of success, employed as a case manager, working 2 jobs and supporting my family of 2 while my fiance is in college. How do you buck the status quo of, quote, material and financial success and prevent yourself from living beyond your means to fit in?
Well, James, man, these boulders that you've picked up, I mean, you picked them up. I mean, you can absolutely put some of these down. I'm not saying you can't just quit your job tomorrow. I mean, it's a process of putting these boulders down. But, James, you get to choose what you're going to carry, man.
Yeah.
And
as I would say, start to look at why these things seem important to you. So for me, I remember my goals were have $1 million, own a Ferrari, and have a big house. And then I sat back one day and I went, wait, do I just want to live the MTV Cribs life? Like, I don't think I actually want any of these things. I just like that show. And I started to actually look at these things and to go, these don't actually matter to me. I don't want these. I can't fit in a Ferrari, number one. I am tall, so it's not going to work. But also, I just don't need this stuff. And you guys talk about this so much. I'm preaching to the choir here. But I really do feel like if you put these things under a microscope and really figure out, do they matter to you as a person, not to you as a family member who's trying to fit in, you might find, oh, I actually rally against all of these. And I want a smaller, more, not extravagant life. And I want to put these boulders down, like you said. And I just think that there's something to be said for challenging the societal norms that a lot of us get force-fed into through family, through relationships, and going, yeah, but what matters to me? Like, what do I want out of this life?
yeah, I think living for others is, I feel like my purpose in life, like giving is living. Like, I want to contribute as much as possible. However, if I don't live for myself first,
Yep. You don't put your oxygen mask on first, what happens?
Yeah, then that contribution means nothing.
Yeah.
So, it's funny because people will often say, well, minimalism is just a permission to be solipsistic. And it's like, well, first off, we're all a little solipsistic. Like, we have to be a little solipsistic. The world does revolve around me and my life. It revolves around Jason and his life and Josh and his life. But that doesn't mean to be selfish. Solipsistic, I don't think, is necessarily means to be selfish. So yeah, be a little solipsistic, live for yourself, but if you're only living for others, then you're not really living at all.
Yeah. Lewis says, this question is really about guilt, I think. I've started working less and trying to live my life more. And he goes on to say, sometimes when I have a day off of work, I feel guilty. Any tips for how to help with this?
Ooh, dude, it's so funny. I relate with that because I worked the 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and it was like going, 100 miles an hour and then coming to a complete stop. And there is like a guilt associated with that. Like, if I'm not doing anything, then I'm doing something wrong. Did you get that at all in the corporate world?
I still have it. Yeah. We had Alex Benayan on the podcast recently. He wrote a book called The Third Door. It's a really good book, and he
You read that one?
Yeah, it was.
Sorry, gotta keep bringing it back. I love you. It doesn't matter.
Oh man, he wants to make me do a spit take there, man.
The thing that he said on the podcast that really stood out to me is, are you spending your time or are you investing your time?
Yeah.
And the thing I really like about that framing is. Maybe the guilt. I think the guilt can be useful in many ways, because maybe Lewis, maybe you actually are wasting your time, and if so, how can you, instead of spending it, how can you invest it? Because taking a day off work doesn't mean that you're doing something that is meaningless or meaningful necessarily. It's just a day off of work. But
right.
What are you doing with that time? Are you investing it in your family, in your community, in your health? And if so, then you can give yourself permission to be happy. But if you're just truly wasting your time, wasting the one life you've been given, then maybe the guilt's appropriate.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the guilt is appropriate no matter what, because this is a symptom of something deeper that's going on. So this is a signal for him to ask himself some meaningful questions and to see whether he is investing his time or not. And I totally agree. If he's wasting his time, if he's wasting this life, then yeah, go ahead and feel guilty. But what is that guilt going to drive you towards?
Yeah, I love the way that you guys think about this. We think about it very similarly. I wrote about it in the book, is we created a framework called Working to Live. And the whole ethos behind it is put on your calendar the things that you want to do in life before you put work on your calendar. So especially if you work for yourself, guess what happens? If you have a 9-hour day to fill, you'll fill it with work. Unless you are intentional about go to the gym first, hang out with my kids, go get lunch with a friend, take 2 hours to go walk in nature, do these things. And so we really have thought about this in creating a framework where we go, let's prioritize life first. Then let's create time for work, and let's force work to happen in that time. And this is Parkinson's law. If you have a certain amount of hours, you will fill those hours because it's human nature. And so we try and rally against this by going, no work, you get 2 hours today. That is it. And other times, there will be weeks when we work 60 hours. We've all been there. We all have new things that are coming out. You guys are working on a new film. It's going to take a lot of hours. But there are times when you're in between those projects when you may only work 5 hours a week. And you're probably like me, where you see a lot of opportunity maybe you're missing out on or whatever, and that's why you feel guilty. I think that's for me when I take a day off, why I feel guilty. Because I just think there's always more work to be done, but yet
And there always is.
Yeah, and it's okay though to not do that work today. I could do it later.
Right, and I think that's the thing we need to be careful. You're never going to get caught up. It's like trying to reach the end of the internet. You're never going to get caught up because there's always going to be another book to write, another film to make, another email to send. And we can look at all of those things and say, well, I could be doing more. But am I doing enough? I think we're never asking ourselves that, or we're very rarely asking, like, what is enough? And that's going to be different for Lewis. It's going to be different for Jason and Ryan and me. It's different for each of us. What is enough? And oh, by the way, enough for me in this phase of my life. 2019 has been the worst year of my life. Like, by far. There's not even a close second. I've had significant health problems. And I've not been able to work 90% of what I've worked 90% less than I usually do. And there's some guilt that initially came along with that, but there had to also be some understanding and some sort of self-empathy in a way to realize, like, I don't have the capacity to do that right now. And I have to explain that to the people closest to me, whether it's my significant other or it's Ryan or Sean and Jordan and Jess, and say, hey, look, I just don't have the capacity to do this right now. And I have to be honest with myself about that, because I could probably work a little bit harder, but it would be unhealthy for me right now because I don't have the bandwidth. In fact, the only thing we're doing regularly right now is podcasting. I haven't been writing nearly as much. The social media, I haven't been doing nearly as much of that, or basically any of it personally. And it's because I just don't have the bandwidth for that right now. And I'm in a season of my life where I have to take that into consideration, but realizing that enough changes in time. And if I get my health back and things are on the up, then I'll have more bandwidth. And then I get to decide, okay, what am I going to do with those hours? It doesn't mean automatically, well, 15 hours a day now, we're just going to be working. No, it's what's the appropriate thing to do with these hours.
Like you, my wife Caroline, 2019 has been the worst year of her life. She's been dealing with crippling anxiety and physical anxiety. Couldn't get out of bed for months, pretty much every day. And she has gone through the same journey you have, and where you figure out, okay, this was bad. This really sucked. 90% of my time has been zapped, whatever it is. But I do think a really interesting thing has happened because I've been so close to her, and now hearing you talk about this, is it starts to really show you some perspective on, I actually didn't need to work as much. I didn't need to do as much. And we live in a society that promotes and celebrates doing and hustle and all these things. Right. And I love that you use the word enough, because it is a thing in our household that we use all the time. And it's, okay, what is enough for us? What is enough money? What is enough time spent working? What is enough time dedicated to our community? And then what is enough time that maybe we're not spending on ourselves and our relationship and those things? And I think it goes back to, I mentioned the hot stove moment. Like, you almost have to have a shitty 2019 to go, maybe some of the habits that I had before led to some of this, maybe not all of it, but to some of it. And now I need to change that moving forward. And I feel a little bit guilty because I don't work as much, and maybe Ryan's carrying the team, or maybe I'm carrying the team for our family, but that's great. That's why I have a team. That's why I'm not doing this all on my own.
And I think we all have that to a certain extent. We get to choose what that team looks like, but we all well, that's not even true anymore. There was a study I saw recently, and I don't even fully understand it, but I think it was this Gen Z or millennials. I'm not sure which, but I think it was millennials where.
Who's younger, Z or millennials?
Millennials are older.
Millennials are the generation we're on the cusp of. Yeah. We're like Gen X and millennial.
Okay.
And I think it was something like 33% say they don't have close friends. 23% say they don't even have acquaintances.
Wow.
I don't know how that's possible. How do you not have an acquaintance?
So
if you
Gen Z is saying this?
Millennials.
Or millennials?
Yeah.
I think social media has a lot to do with that, man.
100% agree.
Because you've got your Instagram self, and then you've got your real life. And I think people focus too much on having a really awesome Instagram self,
right?
Which they forsake their real life for.
Which leads to the next question perfectly. Holly says, in the age of Instagram influencers, how can you help children and teenagers embrace a lifestyle that values meaning, simplicity, and connection, in addition to, or perhaps in place of, mass consumption, competition, and the appearance of internet popularity? So let's talk about this. First off, I've never been influenced by an influencer.
Damn it, I'm trying. I don't consider myself.
If you call yourself an influencer, like
right.
If that's in your bio, you're already just
yeah. And so I actually make a distinction, and every time I tweet that I've never been influenced by, and people get so mad at me. Yeah. Don't you realize you're an influencer, or weren't you influenced by Colin Wright? And he's an influencer. And I always say no, he's influential, and there's a difference. He does some work that is meaningful and it creates value. That value influences me. He himself does not influence.
Right. He doesn't wake up and be like, I'm an influencer. How am I going to influence today?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I like to make a distinction, because a person who is influential creates something that influences others. The work is the influence. The influencer tries to impart their own seeming wisdom or popularity to shape someone else directly without doing the drudgery of creating something that is actually going to shape the conversation, the culture, etc. Our conversation last week with Erwin McManus, we actually talked a little bit about competition, and I think competition. There are sort of two types. There's toxic competition, where there's nothing good about it. It's zero-sum games, where there are nothing but winners and losers. And I remember when we were living in Montana, I would go to sauna with some of the American Indian tribes there, the Blackfoot tribe, and this guy Tom, he said, hey, we don't really understand like the American sense of competition, because in our tribe, like if Jason loses, I lose, and if Jason wins, then I win. And I think in our culture, where it has become highly competitive, there is a sense of sort of toxic competition. In order for me to win, I must beat you.
Yeah.
Now, there are healthy versions of that. Sport, it manifests in sports and generally in a healthy way. It can be unhealthy there as well. But two people playing a basketball game against each other, you're going to have a winner and a loser, and I think that can be a good thing. You can learn lessons from that. It drives me crazy when Ella was first playing soccer when she was 3 or 4 and they didn't keep score. Like because everyone actually is keeping score. We're just pretending that we're not. But the kids were keeping score. And all the parents are keeping score. There just wasn't a scoreboard, and so I think maybe what we're looking at here is what is your scoreboard? And if your scoreboard is vapid, empty, trite, if it's the number of followers on Instagram, then, and I'm not saying for you, but even for your kids, they will ultimately learn that the hard way, or you can try to impart that wisdom on them and saying, hey, that is a metric, but why is that metric meaningful? And if you ask them that, then you're going to start having they're going to start having difficult conversations with you.
Yeah, the number one scoreboard that Holly's kids are going to look at are what Holly uses as a scoreboard. So I totally agree. Like Holly needs to look at what her scoreboard is. That's what her kids are going to mimic. The other thing too is like Holly, you don't want to like tell your kids what they can and can't do. Like just ordering people around, that's not meaningful or fun, and your kids don't want that. You certainly don't want that, but you can certainly set boundaries. And I struggle with this, like thinking about when Mariah and I have kids, if we ever have kids. I mean, life with kids sounds awesome, but life without kids sounds awesome. But, I struggle with like technology and social media and when is the appropriate age to allow kids to do that and how much technology is appropriate. I think each family is going to have a different answer for that. But setting up boundaries, helping them to not just set the boundaries for them, but helping them set their own boundaries. Like that is what is going to help your kids live a meaningful life. If you are giving your kids a tablet and then you're walking away and you're using the tablet as a babysitter, that you know what, the tablet makes a great babysitter, but that's not going to create a very awesome person. I mean, it's like when I see a 2-year-old going through a smartphone better than I can go through a smartphone, mm-hmm. like that is an indicator of something that's going on. That is probably not a good thing. So yeah,
I was at the hospital yesterday. I had to get an ultrasound, and
is it a boy or a girl? No answer. Okay, that's fine. All right.
Surprise! Josh is pregnant.
It's the book. That's
And we were in the waiting room, and Ella didn't have her tablet with her or whatever. And before I went in to get the ultrasound, she just kept like every 2 or 3 minutes she'd say, I'm bored, and it's like I kept telling her, hey, you have to sit with your boredom.
Yeah.
And that's hard for her, obviously, but it's hard for me as a parent too, because I also want to be like, well, here, just use my phone if you don't have your tablet. Here, this is what's easy. Let me pacify you for a few moments, as opposed to saying, you know what, sometimes life is boring, but also if you're bored, you're boring. And I'm trying to explain this to Elle. Like, there are things that you can do on your own with your own imagination. You don't always have to be pacified by something. Yeah. And it's hard to explain that to a 6-year-old, but the alternative is constantly pacifying her, and that's not setting her up for success in the future.
That might be one of the like best superpowers or things to have in your life, is being able to deal with boredom. Like that's powerful, because like we don't have many opportunities to be bored these days, especially with technology. And teaching a kid how to be comfortable with their boredom, like that is, you're really doing them a service by allowing them to be bored and be a little, feel a little bit of discomfort so they can learn how to deal with that. I'll tell you, you and Bex are doing good with the tablet stuff, because when we were babysitting her the other night, when Mariah and I were babysitting her, she had that episode that she was watching.
Uh-huh.
And you had mentioned before you left, you're like, dude, you got to like make sure when she's done with that episode that you stop her, because the episodes will just keep playing. And she went into her room. She's like, I'm going to finish watching the episode. I'm like, all right, let me know when it's over. And dude, she did.
Nice.
Like the episode was over. She like stopped. I mean, maybe because she like knows that Mariah and I were going to like play hide and seek and, do games and stuff. Uh-huh. So maybe that's why. But like, I was really impressed. Like the episode was over, and at 6 years old, like I definitely would have like kept watching cartoons
at
until
38, I was. Don't let me on YouTube, because I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think social media is our next great addiction. So I just think we don't have enough data to show this, but we do have some, which is that like, social media creates a dopamine response just like cocaine, and plenty of studies have said this. And it goes right to your point, is how I would answer this question to Holly, is the way that you use these things is how your kids are going to see the way that you use these things. And it's the same for even just relationships with two people. My wife and I try so hard to never be on our phones in public when we're together. And it's not because we don't want to be, it's because we want to be present with each other. We've left the house to go do something together. Let's do it together. And it's a challenge. It is absolutely a challenge to fight the urges to grab the phone, to pacify the moments, to get through the boredom. But I also have found, for me personally, taking breaks from social media, and I know you guys have done this as well. I did my first detox in 2014. It is enlightening. And I think that if you are a person that feels like you're going to struggle to help even people around you, but kids, it's probably saying a little bit about your usage of these things and going like, well, I can't put Instagram down. Like, how am I going to tell a kid not to put a tablet down? Well, you need to figure that out for yourself, and then also see the benefits of not having to have these things.
Yeah.
And I do want to mention just about your thing about influence and influencers is that our intent is not to be influential. Our intent is to be helpful or entertaining. So when the intent is different, that's when good things happen. That's when influence happens, but it's not because we were trying to be, it's just because we were trying to do the other things we were doing, and it was a byproduct of it.
Ryan and I we're not out proselytizing. Like, I don't want to convert anyone to minimalism. And I think if you're trying to be an influencer, if that is your explicit goal, then what you're trying to do, you're actually trying to either propagate an ideology, which is really bad, or I just think I don't like ideologies in general. I think they're full of dogma. I like ideas, but I don't like ideology. And then also or you're trying to propagate something that is just there to make you money. You see like influencers who like have the perfectly positioned sports drink in their photos or whatever, and it's gross.
Yeah. Did you see the one where the girl got into
the bike accident?
Well, yeah, it's like, I think here's the thing. I think so this long story short, this girl who's very open with a lot of her troubles and tribulations in life, and we talked about that earlier, how it is actually kind of nice to know that, oh, you're not perfect either, but yet you're still, successful in your own way.
Yeah, but there's also something to be said about the overdoing it, the faux authenticity.
Well, that's exactly it. So she had a motorcycle accident, and it turned into a photo shoot. And whether the accident was faked or not, I mean, that's up for debate. But it turned into this photo shoot where it was this, very
perfectly posed photos of her with products.
Products?
Yeah.
It was. Well, yeah. I mean, and again, if you read into the story. And because you've got to hear both sides of the story. She, is very adamant about this was not strategically placed products. But regardless, though, you're in an emergency situation.
You don't need perfectly posed photos.
Right. Exactly. yeah. I mean, and that's. I think that's it's a really dark road we're going down with the influencers. But I'll tell you, man, I saw this one story too about this girl. She had 2.7 billion followers. I don't know how many it was. It was a lot, millions of followers, and she launched her own clothing line. Did you see this one too?
Yeah.
And she sold 5 shirts.
Yeah. That is the difference between influential and influencer.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Because you guys can talk about a thing, you can promote a thing, you can talk, and people will come to it. Same with us. We have a core group of people who believe in us and want to support us. Mm-hmm. And it's because we've given them helpful things. We've entertained them. We've brought value to their life. But when you don't, when you're just a thing to scroll by that looks nice, that's very different. And I think we are finding that when people set out to be those things, there's a realization after a certain amount of time of, oh, I don't have a business. There's no value exchange here. I can't actually make money from this other than companies wanting to have something in the photo with me. And that feels really empty after a while. And I think you just see that in this culture that's changing a little bit, but it's still also so new that I started this 10 years ago, not wanting to be an influencer, not wanting to do that, just wanting to tell stories of brands, but realizing very quickly, oh, I don't want to be someone who just talks about companies. I want to talk about my life, and then a company's just along the way for the ride. Yeah. And then figuring out oh, that also still doesn't feel great. So I don't even want to do that anymore. Yeah. And so we're just in this really weird time of Instagram influencers and all social media people. And going back to Holly's question, I think some of this too is celebrity culture in America, especially, has been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. So how have you helped your kids not idolize celebrities as soon as they grow up? And some of that I think relates to how you keep them away from social media influence and those things too.
Two things there. You use the word just, which I is the most important word, because you're just scrolling through and seeing these beautiful images. And if I were to say, if there's anything that Instagram has done positively for our society, Instagram in particular, is it has helped create some aesthetic beauty that was not otherwise there. I think very rarely there were instances where people really cared about aesthetics because they knew the value that it brought forward pre-Instagram, and they would I think about when we were on our very first tour, Instagram was around but not really not really there. It wasn't at its peak
Right.
popularity.
Still the really ugly logo with like 6 bad filters.
Yeah,
That's all it was.
yeah.
Right.
And it didn't have the popularity it had. But a lot of our tour stops were in coffee shops that year, or really small bookstores or whatever. And some of the coffee shops were ugly, and I remember like coffee shop aesthetic in the oddies, like 2003 time, like it was very like farmhouse, like welcome home signs and stuff. But then occasionally you go to a place. This is going to be a bad example. Like in St. Pete, there was Kawa Coffee, who didn't have great coffee, but they had
The aesthetics down, man.
And in fact,
They looked like they should have had awesome coffee.
right.
Those are the worst.
and the thing though, like that made the experience good is they had a really strong aesthetic, and it made up for the most part for mediocre coffee, right? And there are a lot of places that actually had good coffee, and the aesthetic actually complemented the coffee in a way. But now what you're seeing is aesthetics are becoming more important because you want people to Instagram your retail business or whatever. And so in a weird way, we've brought aesthetics to the forefront, which is, by the way, where they should be. Aesthetics are the visual representation of what you're trying to create. Where it becomes a problem is when we focus just on aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
If it's just a facade on a rotting house, then the house is going to crumble. And that's what an influencer is, where it's aesthetic only. There's no substance. There's no values. There's no system of contribution there. It is merely beauty for the sake of being beautiful. Whereas if you add a beautiful aesthetic on top of something that is meaningful, it actually enhances the overall experience. There's a reason that flowers are beautiful. It's because they attract the most beautiful flowers attract the bees. The aesthetics are actually part of the experience. And if you have a not beautiful flower, it's not going to get propagated at all because the bees aren't going to go to that flower in the first place. So I think it needs to be part of the experience. The second thing I'll say that is worrisome, the worrisome side of this, there's a survey recently amongst high school students about what they want to be when they grow up. And then I think the number one occupation in China was engineer, and number one occupation in the United States was YouTuber. And YouTube is simply a platform. Being a YouTuber literally means nothing. We're on YouTube. Like this podcast is on YouTube, but we're not YouTubers necessarily. I mean, if you call us that, I'm not going to get offended by that. Just like if you call me an influencer, I'm not going to be offended by that. We could have a conversation about it, but our objective is to not be to be a YouTuber. It's to create a video version of the podcast, and YouTube happens to be a distribution platform that we use.
Yeah, the YouTuber though, I think kids look at that and they look at it as an easy way to make money. Yeah, and they're
get success and be accepted, and
there's something there, man. Because an engineer takes work. Like no one in China thinks like I'm going to be an engineer and it's going to be really easy work. Like they look at the hard work and they want to do the hard work. They want to be an engineer. Where here we're looking for the easy way out. We're looking for the ephemeral, simple way to make money, and it's I don't know what that says about our society, but there's something going on for sure.
We're attracted to shortcuts.
We are. I mean, we live in a shortcut culture. There's no doubt about that. It's everywhere, and it's a dangerous thing because what you realize, and I talk about in this book, and you brought it up too, is your life is not a highlight reel. So there's not only going to be positivity, there's not only going to be success. You're going to have downs. You're going to have things that go wrong, and it's about understanding that is life. So if you can figure out how to get through that in your own way and you feel fulfilled by it, even when things are going wrong, and you can deal with them, like your health this year, you still feel like a good person. You still feel like you're bringing value. You still feel like you're a good husband. You still feel like you're a good dad. All these different things. And it's because your life is not centered around some outward external validation and success metric. And for me, I learned that the hard way because I really fell into the outward success metrics of being on all the shows, being on, like, you guys have done a lot of the things that I did many years ago, and it felt great. It felt amazing. But then I would go home and I go, oh, I can't pay the bills this week. Or, oh, I have to I can't sleep because I have to edit a video tonight to do these things. And you start to realize things are out of alignment, although I'm presenting them as in perfect alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what social media tends to do. And it's why I love taking breaks from it. It's why the post that gets the most views on our site, over 1 million views at this point, is a social media detox post. If you search social media detox, our post is number 1.
Wow.
And I love that because it is something we put out into the world that I didn't even intend to have be a thing. It just was something I knew I had to change about myself because I was falling into I need these photos to be perfect. 10 photos later, still not good. Let's take some more. That's a dangerous way to live. And there's something to be said about aesthetics being important, and you're right, because it shows that something has value more than maybe something else does. But if you're just doing it for the aesthetics purpose, I think that's where we really run into some dangerous territory.
It was the biggest differentiator for MisfitCon was everything was handcrafted, and they had an aesthetic presentation. But it wasn't simply that was the icing on all of it, and it's what made it took the meaningful aspects of it and created a visual version of that. Everything was truly handcrafted there. And would it have still been a meaningful experience if we would have used red Solo cups? Sure, probably. But
that's just it. It would have been.
Yeah.
And that's what matters is like the meat of it, the bones of it were beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think what made it most memorable was the fact that the aesthetics were there as well.
Right.
And so you married this meaningful core with a beautiful presentation of it. Not a perfect presentation, but a beautiful presentation. It's putting your best foot forward and using the visual cues was something I think was important for them.
And I think at the root of that event was that it did something so well in bringing a diverse group of people together in a great environment that made it a perfect event. There's no such thing, but it's that intent of it. The food didn't matter, the place didn't matter, the chair, all the imperfections of it and the uniqueness of it really didn't matter, because at the core it was a great thing. And I think that for me is why good movies succeed, good books succeed, good podcasts succeed, good businesses succeed, is because at the core they solve a problem or they create something that is unique that hasn't been done before. And everything else that's on top of it, there's no footage of Misfit anywhere. There are no photos except on Flickr, which tells you how old Misfit is. And it still had a waiting list of thousands of people. And that to me is just the really interesting part of when you make something great. It doesn't have to have an Instagram account and a YouTube account and all of the strategy around it, because the thing is good enough that people will talk about it. And I have a software product that's a very small online course platform that for 5 years has just been a side project. But very quickly here, it's going to start to make me a full-time income for our entire household for all the money that we need, probably in the next 2 years.
Wow.
I'm so excited, but it's been a 7-year journey.
Right.
People aren't willing to go on the 7-year journey. And also I've had to do other things in that time because that wasn't enough for our household. And so I think it's about figuring out making things that are great, using distribution platforms if you can, and then just finding your own weird way to do these things that makes you feel really good about it and that hopefully attracts the right people.
Yeah, the word perfect often, you can have a book that is written perfectly with respect to grammar and syntax. It's called a calculus textbook. And we haven't had one person who's written a calculus textbook on this podcast because it can be flawless in one way, but it lacks the soul of creativity and expression and sort of the heart of connection. And you can have a perfectly perfect textbook, but does it move people? Does it inspire them the same way that Misfit does, and all of its idiosyncrasies, all of its weirdness?
Yeah.
No, it's not even close, right?
Yeah, and I will say one more thing, just going back to this. I remember watching your talk at Misfit, and I was like, man, this guy has it all together. Go up after him, gives a hug. I'm like, oh, he's a hugger. That's cool. They didn't expect that. But then we went to sushi. Do you remember we went and had dinner? And I remember having that dinner with you and going, hold on a second, you're a weird person. You're a funny, interesting person. Next year, you come to Misfit. And so what I saw from Ryan, didn't even know him, but I saw short, clean cut guy. I'm like, oh, this guy's clean cut, straight edge. you're the opposite of those things. And like, I remember your sandals, like I gave you such a hard time about the sandals you were wearing at the time, but it was so you, and it was so like, it was just so much texture of who you were. And so the imperfections of you guys are what make you perfect to some people. The imperfections of Misfit are what made it a perfect event to me. And so I think that perfect word obviously has so much subtext and so much subjectiveness to it, but there is no finding that. There's just trying to figure out how everything fits in a way that you feel like, oh, this is it. This is what I love. This is what I care about. These are the things that matter to me.
Yeah. What people care about is, are you being genuine? Are you being consistent? Are you being honest? And if you can be those things, like you're going to find your tribe, you're going to find your community. But, I think often about Derek Sivers, proudly exclude 99% of customers. Yeah. Like, that's powerful, man.
Yeah. As long as you're not doing it in a spiteful or include everyone who wants to be included, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
And
excluding for the sake of exclusion is, again, not meaningful.
Right. It's just realizing that ultimately what he's saying, what you're saying there is you don't have to try to make something that is for everyone.
Right.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
There's plenty of everyone's out there for us to all have our own little groups of.
Right. And especially in this era where you need the 1,000 true fans or the 6,000 true fans or whatever it is, like to make it worth it. There isn't enough for you, and that enough doesn't include all 7 billion people on this planet.
Yeah.
Jason, I want to thank you for being here today, brother. Where should we send folks? We can tell them to get Own Your Weird and maybe even read it.
I love that we have this, and we didn't say this. Ryan read it, so I think everyone should know that Ryan did read, because he is on the back of the book as a blurb.
I was just gonna say, you got me and Paul quoted back there. I think that's beautiful, man.
Yeah, that's good. I really do appreciate it.
I'm very proud to be on the back of your quoted on the back of your book.
And I will say, I really don't care that you didn't read it, because we know each other. So
well, I do care, and I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. You can read it and then leave a review on Amazon. I want to see your face on there. It's like the only review
3
you've ever.
star.
Exactly.
That's the worst review you can get.
Yeah. So super quick, really funny. I got 2 3-star reviews for early readers. So my publisher got these early readers. 1 3-star review. Worst book I've ever read. Don't pick this book up. 3 stars.
Oh, wow.
Second 3-star review. Love this book. So many insights. And I put them next to each other and I just went, okay, this is why you don't read the reviews. This is why you don't do things for the reviews, because it doesn't matter. So anyway, the book is available everywhere. I recorded the audiobook, had a lot of fun with it. So if people like audiobooks, I hope you enjoy it. As always with authors, if you do buy the book, I'd love to know if it brought you value, if you enjoyed it. My email's in the book. You can find me easily online. Give me a 3-star review if you want. That'd be fine. And then my wife and I run a little community called Wandering Aimfully. It's at wanderingaimfully.com. And if you're excited about taking a break from social media, just Google social media detox and figure that out. If that's the one thing you take away. I love when people find that as to be the like, I'm going to make a change in my life, and I know I'm addicted to this thing. That to me is actually almost as important as buying the book, because I know it's just going to make change in your life.
Dude, I unfollowed everyone on all my platforms, and it made for the most meaningful experience, because I found myself, I'd go to Twitter and I didn't have that feed, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what Jason's up to. Oh, I wonder what so-and-so's up to. And after a month of doing that, I'm like, oh, these are the people that I actually want to follow, or the people that I'm going out and seeking, rather than them just being dumped in my newsfeed. Yeah. Dude, you're one of my favorite people. Aww, the only people that are that I appreciate more than you are our patrons. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome.
What if I was a patron? Would I be on that level?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah. I'm only a patron of Matt Diavella, by the way, just so you guys know. My only person I support, because he's so great.
Yeah. Sean, can you just delete what we've recorded for the last 2 hours?
I looked at it. You guys had enough. I was like, it's fine. They're doing just fine without me.
No.
What about your podcast?
My wife and I have a podcast where we kind of we're shifting gears a little bit. We want to kind of own this idea of experimentation. We've kind of done this in business for the past couple of years, but we really want to put everything through the lens of testing assumptions through the podcast. So we want to talk about life, business, relationships, experimentation, what it looks like to live and work and kind of have those things overlap quite a bit. And then also like how it feels to be in a relationship with the person you work with and how you figure those things out. So we have a podcast called Wandering Aimfully. The name may change, but you'll be able to find it. People are good at searching for things these days. So yeah, those are the things that we do. We have a lot of fun. We love our community as much as you love your patrons. Love you guys, but we love our Waymers more than we love anybody else. So I can go right back at you. But yeah, it's been fun, you guys. I really love hanging out with you. You guys have been super influential in my life, and I know that I'm not alone in saying that. So I really appreciate it.
No, you're awesome, man. I gotta tell you, dude, when he first told me about Jason Surfer App or JasonHeadsets.com, I mean, I had this instant like judgment, which I typically don't judge, man. If anything, like I relate, but I did have this instant judgment, like, oh, like Jason's looking to make a quick buck. But like once I got to know you and why you do the things you do, that is what really solidified our friendship, man. Is like the reason why you do things. They're not just thoughtless things. There's a lot of deliberate things that go, a lot of deliberate thoughts that go into it, and that's what I appreciate you, man. Everything you do is very deliberate.
I felt the opposite from Ryan, like, because the things that you did, like the selling of the T-shirt, or the logos on the T-shirt, whatever, and selling your last name, like, fundamentally they don't align, not with my foundational values, but my core values. But I applauded the uniqueness of each so much, and like the creativity of each of those, where I was like, that's not something I would ever do, but wow, I really appreciate someone who brings a totally different perspective and also is willing to do something that is so far outside the box. And by the way, something that should have been obvious. Like, yeah, you can sell your last name. Why hasn't anyone done that? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, just because sometimes there are things that no one has done. And so I actually really appreciate it, even if it didn't resonate with me as something I would do personally. The same is also true with, like, Bex and I go to soccer games. I'll never play soccer, but like I can appreciate there's an amount of creativity or talent there that I don't possess, but I can still appreciate it.
I picture you as a crazy soccer dad on the sideline, and it makes my life. I don't know if that is you, but I just picture you screaming at little kids, and for some reason I love it. I don't know
like
why.
tasing other parents.
Ella, what the fuck is wrong with you?
You should have scored. Yeah, that's what I picture. So that's the reality I live in.
Appreciate you, brother. Love
You're
you,
awesome,
man.
man.
Thank you for being here.
Yes. Thank you, patrons. You guys are awesome.
All right, y'all. Love people, use things. We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.